Hello, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's session of Detour Ahead. We've got 2 more lectures to go, and this is the first one with Lucy Tomlins. Welcome, Lucy.
Hi.
Hi. So Lucy's going to speak a little bit about her practice and what she's doing today work-wise. She's a former UEL student and then graduated at the Royal College of Art. She calls herself a cultural producer, and I'm sure she's going to go into that a little bit more today with everyone, as well as her sculptural practice. So we'll all get to know a little bit more about that. She says her practice reconstructs and reimagines everyday objects, carefully selected for their ability to reflect aspects of contemporary life and current social concerns. I will get started, Lucy.
Great. Hi. Hi, everyone. Even though I can't see you, all I can see is my presentation, and I feel quite far away being up in Warwickshire. And I could be speaking to 5 of you or 100, I have no idea. But anyway, welcome and thanks for joining this talk. So I'm going to talk a bit about the last 12 years, I guess, from when I left UEL in 2010. A bit about Pangaea Sculptors Centre, which is the organisation that I run, as well as my own kind of practice, and to focus a little bit at the end, depending on time, on 2 current projects, which are both quite different, but both have a focus on the environment and kind of sustainability in sculptural practice. So I was at UEL part-time as a mature student from 2015 to 2020, which for me was my late 20s. And it was great to have 5 years instead of 3, which I think really goes way too fast. And everyone that remembers me will know that I spent as much time as possible in the workshops, kind of learning new skills and techniques from Mark and Sai and others. I think I kind of could have done with a year out after that to best kind of verify myself as an artist. But I did go straight on to the Royal College of Art to study the MA in sculpture there from 2010 to 2012. It was right at the cusp when they started to charge fees. So had I decided to take a year off, I would suddenly have incurred some additional fees, which would have made it cost prohibitive for me. So I went straight off to the Royal College, and it wasn't all kind of rosy. It's a really all-consuming course, and it's hard to manage when you're also holding down a 3-day-a-week job to sustain yourself living in London. And it's rightly so challenging. It's challenging kind of technically, conceptually, and also emotionally. And there were plenty of occasions that I felt like quitting. But I learned a lot, and in many ways it's really been pivotal in where I am now, which is overworked and underpaid, but still very much of the belief that making art and sculpture in particular, for me, is a kind of lifestyle choice. It's almost a philosophical position, and feels very part of my DNA. And it's also through receiving a Deutsche Bank award for creative enterprise with Sam Zeeley whilst studying at the Royal College that we went on to establish the Pangaea Sculptors Centre, which I'll also talk about in a moment. So yeah, as I said, I kind of call myself an artist and cultural producer, as well as being the director of Pangaea Sculptors Centre. And I'm particularly interested in sculpture and 3-dimensional art practice and the specifics of the medium. So I really understand kind of the making and the production, the logistics, the economics, materials and context as all essential contributors to the creative act. So where your materials are coming from, how they're sourced, cost constraints, kind of context in terms of where you're how you're making things, where you're making things, who you're making them with, as well as the kind of specific context around where you might be exhibiting your work. And I also understand sculpture in a kind of fairly elastic sense, really as anything that foregrounds materials in space. And I understand sculpture as a kind of frisson or connection between the human and the other. So I think kind of the audience, the reading of the work is very much kind of part of the work as well, not just the kind of physicality of it. Oh. So yeah, my sculptural practice often reconstructs and reimagines everyday objects, and I call this kind of a remaking of the ready-made. And these objects are carefully chosen to kind of represent in physical form contemporary social concerns. And this could be anything from kind of using food as a metaphor to deconstructing an olive tree. And I'm intrigued by how the kind of process of altering these known objects through scale, material, and placement can create uncanny relationships between seemingly disparate materials and things, and encourage the viewer to reconsider their everyday situated context. So I think really, we end up living with these kind of very everyday objects in a way that we begin to take them for granted, and by kind of representing them, reforming them, putting them in an exhibition context, we can, I'm hoping that the work kind of encourages a kind of a reconsideration of these things that may be taken for granted. So what you can see on this slide is the resulting artwork from the casting of the olive tree that you saw in the previous slide, which was carried out in Valdealba in Spain, in a rural agricultural community. And in the end, it was a silicone mold that was exhibited, draped and displayed like a meat or a hide. And the fiberglass exoskeleton of that same mold laid on its side in a kind of cornucopia form that had kind of mushroom form references. And in this final installation, they created a dialogue between the organic and the synthetic, and kind of a dialogue really between kind of industrial process, the agricultural industry in the rural community, and kind of a sculptural practice. And then, kind of works like this. It's always been important that my work is accessible and multi-layered, and that it can be appreciated on a kind of material and physical level, with greater conceptual depth should you care to delve. So I'm interested in kind of work that's democratic and work that can engage a kind of broad audience, not just a kind of art world audience. And another very old piece from just after I graduated from the Royal College, and this showed a video of a butcher carving a piece of beef, but it was looped backwards, so he ends up kind of sewing the meat back together. And it was again a kind of reflection on how the kind of art of making, whether you're a sculptor or a butcher or a hairdresser or a kind of cook, is kind of really the same sensibility and kind of craft and relationship between kind of you and your tools and your material. But yeah, these are really old works, and the most recent, the olive tree piece, being from 2019. And they were really of a time when I kept my work as an artist in the studio really distinct from my role as running Pangaea Sculptors Centre. I kind of feel now that I'm in a very different place with that. The world is very different. My approach to practice is very different. I think at the time it felt really important that these two facets had two distinct identities, as I tried to build the reputation of Pangaea as well as my own reputation as an artist. And I think you can, if you come across as a very good organizer or administrator, you can often find that your artist skills get get kind of forgotten, as people kind of want you to kind of help with that side of things. So I think I was quite aware of that at the time as well, and kind of try to keep separate these two identities, having different emails, different websites. But more and more, it's really become difficult for me to distinguish a clear division of labour between these two parts. And I did always see the creation and development of Pangaea in a sculptural sense. The idea of building something from matter, from materials, with other people, that was kind of responsive to context, engaged with particular systems. So I don't think that they're too distinct anyway. And now I kind of am really comfortable talking about the idea of having a hybrid practice. I use cultural producer as well as artist, and I kind of understand it all kind of collectively as part of that practice. And the types of work I do kind of oscillate between solo studio time, which is more and more infrequent these days at this particular kind of juncture in my life. Curating exhibitions, establishing artist residencies, and kind of a range of different arts programming, public realm art installations, kind of talks, as well as overseeing fabrication for other artists within my work for Pangaea. So it kind of sees me toggling between larger scale collaboration and working solo, and the blending of these different strands of activity, and really understanding them as all essential parts of an artistic practice has become really key. And I think as well, the importance of collaboration and kind of that role has definitely been kind of growing over the last few years for me. And, for example, Pangaea produced Harold Offey's Hail the New Prophets for Bold Tendencies recently, Anthea Hamilton's Cabbage Water feature as part of her garden commission for the Studio Voltaire refurb, and Stone Butch for Roseanne Robertson for Sculpture in the City. So I'll just tell you a bit about Pangaea. Because the Pangaea Sculptors Centre does kind of a range of things. And I do encourage you to check out the website, pangaeasculptorscentre.com, because there's some great free resources on there. For example, last year we did a kind of on fabrication season of talks in collaboration with the Henry Moore Institute, and they're all freely available online. So we had a talk by Fabricators Millimeter and the Tate's Turbine Hall Commission producer, Petra, talking about the making of Cara Walker's Fons Americanus, which is made from cork actually, and sustainability was very much part of the brief of the project. There's a kind of talk about fabrication as a career option. We had a great talk by Heather Phillipson talking about the making of the Fourth Plinth and the Duveen Galleries Commission, Thomas J. Price, and kind of loads more. So do check them out. I think they're really, really useful resources. So we set up Pangaea in 2013. It's a not-for-profit community interest company, and it's a platform supporting contemporary sculptors and fostering technical excellence. We are particularly interested in supporting artists in the first 7 years of professional practice, but it doesn't discount students from engaging with kind of what we do, or anyone post the 7 years. And we are trying to kind of remove barriers of entry into the profession by kind of, I guess, making visible what goes on behind the scenes to kind of demonstrate how things are produced, how the system operates. And we promote and enrich wider public engagement with sculpture through educational, critical and cultural programming. And really central to our ethos is that artists should be able to further their practice without the constraint caused by a lack of access to equipment, facilities and expertise. So we're committed to providing opportunities around kind of practical support to enable the development of practice. And it kind of came out of the fact that Sam and I were avid users of the workshops at the Royal College. As I said, I was at UEL too, and we were acutely aware that when we left art school, we wouldn't have these facilities and these free facilities anymore. And bearing in mind that I would kind of be doing a bit of welding and then in the wood workshop and then kind of making molds and doing a bit of bronze, there's no way I was going to be able to kind of set up a studio that would enable all of those things. So how would we continue to develop our practice and our technical skills without any kind of support in that area? So that was the kind of premise, initial premise for Pangaea, and it's evolved kind of slightly since, but at the root of it is really advancing kind of technical skills and foregrounding them as a way to kind of push individual practice and think about the development of the kind of discipline of sculpture as a whole. So I'm going to jump in a second off this presentation to two different PDFs that I've got and talk about two ongoing current projects that I'm working on. Camp, Do We Go Around the Houses or Do Houses Go Around Us? And Hand, Earth, Gesture, Return, Sustainable Public Art for Coventry and Warwickshire. So I think, you know, lockdown was a time of reflection, as I'm sure it was for a lot of people. And, you know, the kind of, you know, the climate crisis became much more, I became much more aware of it. You know, I think it was out there a lot more in the media generally. You know, we were kind of, we could kind of feel the impact of kind of no cars being in London and hearing the birds. You know, in a way it kind of became a bit more kind of real. And I think that tied in with, yeah, just really thinking about sculpture as a kind of discipline within arts, and it being the most labor intensive, material heavy, resource heavy kind of the disciplines. A lot of the kind of processes are, you know, like mold making using silicons and fiberglass. There can be kind of a lot of waste, you know, of course not compared to kind of industry, but kind of even so, I think to kind of consider the fact that, you know, yeah, we're in this climate emergency, and how do we respond to that? How does kind of practice respond to that? You know, should we be falling into the kind of same old patterns of using these same materials and kind of techniques, or should we use this as an opportunity to kind of rethink some of that? And also, I guess I was thinking about sustainability more, not just in terms of material choices and approach, but also in terms of how to have a sustainable practice, you know, how to kind of get paid, like what is important to me in a practice and what isn't. And that has really led me to kind of questioning through these two projects, you know, I guess kind of exploring sustainable materials and processes, and kind of using these projects to kind of like reflect on these questions, you know, personally. And I think, as well as, you know, more sustainable material choices, I think I realized that the kind of collaboration aspect and community engagement is also something that I want to prioritize more in my own practice, you know, Pangaea's practice, the fact, you know, that they are kind of one and the same in a sense. And, you know, I'd kind of said that my earlier work already used kind of very everyday imagery as a way to be kind of more democratic and accessible. And I think it's, for me, it was just a case of kind of almost thinking about how to take that further and engage, you know, more directly new audiences, how to get offer access to kind of making and the experiential sides of being an artist and being in the studio to people that haven't had the opportunity to even consider that in their life to this date. So this image here is part of camp. Do we go around the houses, or do houses go around us? And it's a 3-part sculpture, which is going to be temporarily installed in the grounds of Liverpool Parish Church and opens on the 18th of February. And it will be there for 2 months, and then it will move to Metropolis in Coventry for exhibition there for a further 2 or 3 months. And it consists of 3 models of shelter-like forms, each expertly crafted from natural materials, clay and straw, reclaimed Portland stone, and mycelium, the root network of fungi. And the works are, so this piece that you're looking at is a kind of render of the stone carving. It's about 1 meter tall, and excluding the plinth, it's about 1 meter by 1 meter as well. So the 3 shelters are kind of similar size, and they're presented really as tests or experiments, which in the installation, which they're kind of works in progress. They're models for future evolution, and the work is displayed in a state of flux. So each of these are natural materials, and they've got varying properties and states of permanence. So throughout the duration of the exhibition, these materials are going to be given up to the elements and will transform. And the clay will erode. I don't know what will happen to the mycelium. The results are as yet unknown. But in this way, it feels like a true collaboration with nature, and a kind of giving up, the work to nature to see what happens. So I'll show you some making images and some process images on that one in a second. And then the second example I want to talk about is Hand, Earth, Gesture, Return. So this is a collaboration. It's a collaborative, ephemeral and sustainably focused public realm art installation planned for this summer at the Coventry Canal Basin. And it's working with 5 lead artists from the UK and India. So I'm a kind of producer on it, not an artist. I'm working with Dolon Kundu, Jim Woodall, Rachel Champion, and Amy and Oliver Thomas Irvine. And it prioritizes working with unfired clay and straw, locally extracted and locally grown, and then building the artwork in public with communities, and then eroding the work in public. So the clay will wash down and the materials effectively return to the earth. And the idea is that, the work will be kind of ephemeral over kind of a week or so, and will be kind of demonstrating the entire life cycle. So the central theme is hand gestures. These are some early visualizations from the artists. I think these are being taken further over the next few months. I think that, it's unlikely that there will be 5 giant hands there anymore. It's hand gestures in a kind of much more kind of conceptual sense is what's going to be taken forward into the kind of next stage. But I think, hands and contact are increasingly prevalent as we emerge from the pandemic, where, touch was apparently cancelled and hands were relentlessly lathered in alcohol to rid virus molecules and bacteria. And also the symbolic nature of the hand is, covering new societal ground, the openness of unconscious action and or interpretation has now shifted focus kind of to rid a surface. But also the hand is both a universal, a universal and personal symbol, and they convey meaning that penetrates barriers of gender, age, race, kind of language barriers. And I think that was really important in the kind of thinking for this project, which is very much focused around creating something site specific for the communities in and around the Foes Hill area of Coventry, which is extremely multicultural. Living there are a lot of people with Indian and Bangladeshi heritage, and kind of these are kind of ideas that we want the kind of work to kind of connect into. So working with clay and straw, you know, these are, again, the kind of humblest of materials. They're used all around the world, from, you know, Egyptian mud brick to thatching, cob work. In India, in Kolkata, the Kumatuli artisans work with unfired clay and straw to make Hindu gods and goddesses for the kind of festivals there. So again, I think through the use of these materials and their kind of language, their language of kind of making, we can actually create connections between very kind of seemingly different and geographically dispersed communities, and actually kind of, you know, find connections. So just bear with me, because I now need to kind of somehow get out of this slideshow and move to my PDFs. Show you. There you go. Okay, full screen mode. Try that. This presentation wasn't kind of created for this, so I might jump around a bit. And same with the other. So I really just want to kind of go through the making process with you. It's a project that has really been, for me, an experiment in kind of testing out a lot of different processes and thinking about the relationship between traditional sculpting techniques and digital innovation. And it's been very much a collaboration. So I've been working with Pangaea Fabricators, a great digital designer called Mike Gregory, an amazing mold maker called Luke Twigger. I've been collaborating with the Building Crafts College in East London, the stonemasons department, and in particular working with a stonemason called Adeline Wartner, and also been collaborating with a mycelium specialist company called Biome, and Oksana Bondar, Candice Dryburn, and Toon Drisden there. So certainly I can't take credit for you know, all this project. It's definitely a kind of collaboration, a coming together of skills, and it's been a kind of great experience for that reason as well. So the idea for me was to kind of position these three materials kind of in dialogue with each other: the mycelium, the clay, and the Portland stone, and to think about, I guess, the history of the built environment and traditional techniques, and then kind of maybe think about yeah, how we could look to nature, kind of what is the kind of future of the construction industry, of kind of the use of materials, whether it's for sculpture or whether it's more kind of broadly out in our kind of world, in our cities. And you know, yeah, should we make things out of materials that last, like Portland stone? Should we create things that only last as long as their useful life? Should we return to traditional structures and techniques that are, you know, low cost but labor intensive with minimal environmental impact? How can we look to nature to lead innovation and create a healthier and more sustainable built environment? So this is mycelium, and you know, the idea that mushroom fungus can eat waste matter, and they talk about the fact that it, in the future it might be able to kind of eat plastic and solve some of our, major kind of global problems. And then also, look at the image on the right. To me, like materially, it is a really interesting, it's interesting in itself. And so I think there's that kind of the physical nature of sculpture, and that immediacy of the kind of the interaction between you and the artwork, and then also the kind of the more conceptual aspects. And then the kind of second piece, thinking about these are kind of Egyptian cob bricks. On the left, these are some of the clay and straw idols that the Kumatuli artisans of Kolkata make. And then the image on the right is us working in the studio, making our own mix. So how I think quite often in the West, we maybe, we've had a kind of propensity to kind of think that, we need to kind of innovate and kind of update things and, move from kind of shiny steel to kind of glass to kind of all of this kind of jesmonite cladding and things that we see everywhere. And actually, maybe we should think about some of these kind of other cultures and and kind of techniques from other cultures that perhaps through necessity haven't had the luxury to invest in these kind of more expensive and slick systems, and so they still have very much as part of their culture these traditional kind of making techniques that are they're kind of low cost. It's materials that are easily accessible, that are locally sourced, that can be extracted. And perhaps there's some learning for us in that approach. And so following that kind of through, I did research into my local area and discovered that in at Newbold Common, a short distance from my house, there used to be an old brickworks, and that there are clay deposits. So I got permission from the council to locally extract the clay. And then we went through a process of drying the clay and kind of cleaning out the impurities before kind of mixing it with straw and using it in the making process. And then, just some images of Portland Stone Quarry, St. Paul's Cathedral, thinking about, taking this idea of a very simple kind of tent form, like how that could start to kind of move this thinking about materials into a dialogue with how we live as people on the planet. And so connections between civic pride and protest, thinking about migration and the concept of home when one is homeless or stateless. So just to run through, just keeping an eye on the time. So just to kind of run through how they were made. So initial one-to-one maquettes were made using concrete canvas and kind of timbers. And then for the Portland Stone piece, the piece was digitally scanned and then taken into ZBrush, and the form was manipulated. So the idea was that the stone carving that was produced would be made out of building blocks. And so to make sure that the form worked with those building blocks, we needed to adjust it at various points, and we need to work out where those breaks were. Because, with stone, if you end up, if we cut the layers at particular points and we ended up with a kind of very fine bit of stone that would just break off in the carving, the piece wasn't going to work. So we had to think about all of that in advance and make sure we weren't kind of left in that position when we started carving the actual piece. And then this is working at the Building Crafts College with their amazing equipment and this beautiful power saw. I'd love to show you the video of it in action because it's a pretty special thing. But So Adeline is the one working the machine. So she did the bulk of the carving with me. And then, it's a feat in itself, just moving the blocks from the yard and getting them cut up. That involves a team of people, given the weight of the materials. So the blocks were kind of roughed out and cut down as much as possible. And then with the we had the digital renders to work from, and we also produced 2D templates for every single block, for every single side, so that it could be held up to the stone, and we could kind of carve it back with confidence to its final position. And a few action shots and some images of getting kind of close to that final form. And then for the mycelium piece, so from the same, from a different but same process maquette, silicon and fiberglass mold was taken. And then working with Biome in their laboratory in London, they have kind of a waste mix that they impregnate with spores, which are then packed into the mold. And in an environmentally controlled area, over kind of several weeks, the mold is kind of left to, left so that the kind of mycelium can effectively eat and spread itself through all of the waste matter. And then the top right picture is after demolding. You see it comes out really white, and it's still very moist at that stage and active. And then to kind of kill off the mycelium and make it inert, they dehydrate the sculpture. And so the image you can see on the far left is as the mycelium kind of comes out of the dehydration process. But actually, before it went in there, so one of the things that we realized is that the mycelium is very sensitive to touch. It marks very easily. And I had been struggling a little with the kind of disconnect between me as an artist and this object that had effectively been made by Biome. So, apart from making the original maquette, I hadn't had much connection with it over the latter stages of the process. And so this was a great way to kind of make a physical intervention which enabled me to reconnect with the sculpture and impact its final look and quality. So I had a love-in for half an hour in this little greenhouse, caressing the sculpture and kind of making marks before it went in to be dehydrated. And then this piece is the final piece. So as I said, the clay was locally extracted. It was then kind of dried out and kind of broken up, and then re-soaked in water in almost a kind of slip level to remove impurities, and then used in a clay mold, kind of pushed into a clay mold, and then which was kind of flipped. And this is kind of how the piece comes out. The cavity is actually produced separately and then need to be inserted and kind of finished once the piece was demolded. So when it goes to Liverpool, it's going to go dry, and then it's going to be left out in the elements to erode, depending on the weather. And then when it's exhibited in Coventry, I'll make a kind of second version, and that will be taken out of the mold immediately into the exhibition and will come out wet, and then that will slowly dry and kind of crack over the duration of the exhibition. And that's really that project in a nutshell. And I'm conscious of time, but if I can just run through the other project. Is that okay? So I don't know how much time you want for questions and things at the end. Okay, I'll just keep going. So, oh, hello?
I was just wondering, I mean, obviously this is a project probably that you came up with, but some of the projects, do people approach you with ideas for projects?
They do, but it isn't something we can help with at the minute that often. I mean, we can offer advice, but we can't kind of take on someone else's project and support it because we just don't have the resources. That said, if it's kind of around the fabrication or technical services, we do support that, but we kind of don't bring other people's projects under the Pangaea umbrella, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But if the Howard Offay piece, people obviously come to us with kind of commissions or fabrication work, and we get approached quite a lot by students actually, and earlier career artists with projects they want to realize and they're not sure how to go about it technically, and we try and offer advice. Well, we offer advice for kind of free, and you could always kind of send us your projects and we'll help where we can. And that is part of our kind of remit as well, to kind of support in that way. So we're open to doing it, and we always try and think about kind of learning and kind of teaching as we kind of go through the delivery of any of our projects. So with Roseanne Robertson, it was her first time she'd worked with an external fabricator. So even in terms of the language to use, or the kind of project management side, or when to involve an engineer, there were quite a lot of moments like that where we try and make sure that we're communicating in a way that we're kind of like teaching and making it an easier process for the artist next time as well.
Did you get training on all of this yourself? Did you get some funding when you were setting up? I'm just wondering about students, if they want to set something up, but this is a lot of knowledge that you've gathered over the years, and where do people start out? Is that too big a question?
Yeah, that's too big a question. I mean, I studied business before. I studied fine art, so that was my first degree. So I think that has really helped me on the business side of things. And there are arts admin courses and things out there as well, but that's definitely helped. And then in the kind of roles that I had, whilst at UEL and at the RCA, I was kind of doing project management work and working with external design agencies. So some of that experience has come over the years. But also, I'm not like MDM props are, I would like one of the kind of best UK fabricators for making art. We don't have their level of expertise in-house, but we also work with a network of other fabricators and engineers and other makers, so that if I don't know or we don't know, we kind of know who you should speak to.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good.
But I think in terms of thinking about kind of careers post art school, there's an artist. Being an artist is only one of many routes. I think quite often, I don't know how it is at UEL anymore, but certainly at RCA, those opportunities weren't really talked about. One of the reasons that we did the talk with Petra at Tate as the project manager was that I think people just think there's a curator. Like, they don't realise that there's actually this whole other job role, the project manager, which is much more hands-on and dealing with the delivery of the project, dealing with the fabricator, like working with the artist. And we wanted to kind of highlight that by getting her to speak rather than the curator. Plus, she kind of knew more about the nuts and bolts for that reason. And I think the talk that I mentioned before, fabrication as a career is really interesting and something to listen to if people are thinking about alternative routes. And actually, a lot of the smaller kind of fabricators we work with and try and push work through are kind of artist makers. So it's kind of very infrequent that you're making a career out of purely being an artist, isn't it? Everyone's have a few different strings to their bow, and fabrication is a good career route. And I think with the bigger fabrication places, quite often you can go in at quite a low level in terms of skills and be trained up. And lots of people say they they didn't really learn much skill wise at art school. It was after they left and they got into one of these, you know, commercial fabrication places that's when they kind of really learnt how, you know, how to do things, how to make molds, how to do the finishing, you know, at that, you know, professional industry level.
There's a question here. Do material choice and texture of other mediums trigger your ideas and memories while on the process of making? Hence the migrant issues.
Can they just explain that?
I don't know.
Sorry, so say it again. Do you like material
choices and texture of other mediums trigger your own ideas and memories whilst during the process of making? So you're making something, and those material choices and textures, you know, they like trigger ideas of migrant issues or something.
Yeah, I think so.
Or while you're feeling the materials, possibly.
Yeah. Sorry, so I wasn't sure if it was. Yeah, okay. I guess there's two ways to answer it. Yes, I think so. I think absolutely. I don't think all of, you know, the explanation I've got now about camp, for example, I had at the beginning. You know, it's through working with the materials, going through these processes, having these interactions with these experts that you begin to, you know, unpick exactly what it is that you're doing and what relationships it has. And
Yeah.
I think having time and space to, you know, enable that like dialogue with the materials, you know, to kind of happen is really important. And yeah, I think that's when you kind of, you know, it's that research phase, it's that making phase that you kind of begin to kind of map these connections or see these connections, whether they're, directly through lived experience or wider, you know, social issues like migrant issues.
And I think that's you touched on that slightly when you were talking about mycelium, because you hadn't had the hand of the artist in the work until that final phase, and the importance to you of, you know, being hands-on and being part of the making. There's still that need, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. And I think because I think that that material physical understanding is a really important outcome for me experientially, as well as, you know, like to be in the work as well. And if I didn't just want to fabricate that piece, you know, I didn't just want to pay someone to make it for me. I wanted to kind of start to understand what this material is, how it networks, you know, how you use it, all of those kind of things. And then, you know, that kind of physical touch was really important. And actually, had I not been down there and had these conversations and even kind of known that it reacted so rapidly to, you know, a very slight touch, you know, I wouldn't like have that knowledge now. You know, they would have just dehydrated it and shipped it to me in a box and I would have just had it finished, you know. So
Yeah, I think that is important. I mean, I couldn't help thinking when you introduced the subject about the three little pigs and that metaphor, and the environment and the materials that you were choosing, and, you know, a sort of a sort of an adaptation of that theme.
Yes, I have. Yeah, I've definitely thought about that too, and I did think about bringing it into the title at one stage, but I went in another direction. But yeah, I think it's there, especially because of the scale of them. Like if you see them in real life, anyone wants to come up to Coventry or get to Liverpool, they are small. You know, they're kind of like dog houses or something, and it's definitely kind of in there. But actually what I've tried to do is pull that back a little in the display and kind of set them up as these kind of tests, so they almost look like they are models for something bigger, because that was you know, like I was getting feedback like, oh, you've made these cute little dog houses, and I was like, no, that was definitely not what you know, that was not the reaction I wanted you to have. Like how can I kind of change things around, you know? And actually, I wonder if I've seen this is all up, you know, then there isn't a great image. So when you're stone carving, you underneath this image on the left, I thought there might be an image, are these like great timber bankers that they use that take a lot of weight. And actually the piece worked really well on kind of a table of that height with these bankers underneath, and it kind of also, the idea of then displaying it, you know, in this way, like, came to the fore, and that's actually how I'm going to show the finished work. I've remade some bankers, and it's going to sit at kind of table height, and you know, it then it kind of, yeah, becomes more about experiment, about model, about something in progress, in process, because it's always felt to me like this is my first engagement with some of these materials. You know, I don't think it's the end. I don't think it's going to be perfect. I want it really to be about like the start of something, a kind of conversation between the materials. I'm really hoping to do a few talks in Coventry. So it's more about encouraging a dialogue rather than just being like in and of the work itself.
We've still got another 9 minutes.
Shall I show you then a little bit on the other project, the Handout?
Yeah, that would be nice.
So I might, yeah, I'll jump around a bit. I'll let you just absorb some images. So yeah, we're hoping to locally source our clay from Camden Hall Park in Coventry. And last summer, I don't think we've got any images. Got any images? That's a bit foolish. Last summer, we planted our own wheat field in Hatton, which is about half an hour out of Coventry. So I've been doing some research with the Thatching Association, and I'd been down the year before to see how thatching straw is farmed, and through that had been put in contact with a great thatcher called Wesley Marriott. So I had done that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, I'd got a research grant through the British Council and Coventry City of Culture to go and work with these Kumatuli artisans in Calcutta, which is why kind of I've mentioned them. And really, they were the kind of a real driving inspiration for this kind of whole project and this idea of erosion and this kind of making the making visible, because there is a whole quarter in Kolkata, and the whole area, everyone that lives and works there is in some way engaged in the making of these idols for these big Hindu festivals. The energy and excitement of the making is out on the streets. So you kind of walking along and people are mixing rice husks with clay with their feet outside. There are people making these massive idols. You know, there's things drying in the sun. It really feels, you know, like a site of production. And I was really interested in thinking about how to kind of translate that into, you know, the Coventry context. So not directly kind of copy it. Trying to see. So the bottom left is kind of here are some of the images here of Kolkata and kind of what it's like. And you know, when these idols are finished, I'm not so interested in them. You can't see that there's straw underneath. They're adorned and painted. They're very finished, and they become gods, and they're very culturally specific. But actually, that making, that moment where things are in flux is really exciting. And then also I love the idea of the erosion process, that that they're resubmerged in the river and these materials are returned to the earth. And you know, in terms of, you know, a more sustainable approach to practice, that felt like something really interesting to explore. So when I came back from India, I was thinking about like how to find the British equivalent of this rice straw, and it, you know, led me on a in various directions, but ultimately decided that thatching straw was kind of the closest. It's not quite the same materially, it's kind of a lot thicker, but still, like, to get the length that we needed, thatching straw was the way to go. So it's actually in short supply because of the inclement weather. The thatching straw harvests haven't been great. Also, a lot of the small farmers being bought out by bigger farmers that aren't interested in, you know, the straw, they're interested in the grain, and farming systems have changed. So to kind of guarantee our supply, our thatcher said, well, why don't you just grow your own? So we were like, okay. We managed to secure a field in Hatton, work with a farmer who planted our our grain for us. And then in the summer, we had a big community event with traditional scything techniques and an old reaper binder, because, you know, big modern combine harvesters just, you know, mulch up all the straw. They're not interested in the straw. So we had to kind of think about how we could save the save the straw. And we made that an event, and then we also invited 5 world rhythm drumming specialists from the area to kind of come down and make a film with us in the wheat field. We're going to bring them into the final performance in Coventry. So we like the idea that they were, you know, part of the seed of this project, and growing the wheat was the seed of this project. So there's a film available on YouTube, which you can watch through the website, which is this, I've got a clip, but I think we'll run out of time to show it. But it's this initial coming together of the artists, the visual artists, with the drummers to explore collaboration and think about how they might take their collaboration forward to the main installation this summer. And then we transformed the I don't think I've got a picture. Got it. Hang on. Yeah, here we go. So here's some of the activity. And then the bottom left, we have created a thatched rick structure. So before, everyone had barns, and this process is still used around the world today. What would happen is a very light thatch would be put on top of your harvest that would keep it protected from the weather for one season until you needed to use it. But now, you know, straw is put away in barns and is safely stored there. And so it's not a common sight on, you know, in the landscape anymore, but it was very much back in the day. So we've created this, it's about 3 meter cubed thatched rick, which is temporarily on display at this walled garden in Hatton. And then in March, we're going to dismantle it, move it to Hatton Locks, and going to transform the materials yet again into what we're calling a hairy barge installation. So we're working with the Canal and River Trust Heritage Boat Team, and have got one of their boats, which we're going to kind of load up with our straw, make some kind of furry toupee, and then travel the straw over 4 days from Hatton Locks along the canal route to the Coventry Canal Basin, which is where we're going to produce the final installation. And from there, the straw is going to be broken up. It's going to be distributed out into the community. It's going to go off to the artist studios, and then it's going to we're going to work in various ways with the artists and community groups to reform it again into kind of components of this final installation, be mixed with the clay, and then it'll all be brought back together in July for this final moment of becoming before the whole thing is washed away. So these are some of the kind of workshops and activities that we've done so far, exploring the materials. That's some information on the artists. Some of the reference images. And this is the site that I'm talking about. It's a really beautiful location with quite a lot of heritage assets in the city, but it's very underused at the moment.
Oh, there's some questions popping up from Soraya. Was there a moment where things didn't go as you expected, and how did you handle it?
Well, we've just made the assumption on this project that nothing will go as expected. And we're being very open to and responsive to that kind of approach. I think, we set it up during kind of lockdown and COVID, when we didn't even know when we started it what state the world would be in now. So, with that in the background, we kind of always knew that we'd have to be reactive to situations. And, we had Jim was stuck out in Saudi for the initial R&D phase was this time last year, over 3 months between the artists. And we really hoped that they would have this embedded period in Coventry. No one could go anywhere. So the research work had to happen without anyone ever coming to the city. We had to kind of bring the city to them via Zoom. Yeah, Jim was in Saudi installing some pieces out there and couldn't even get back to the UK for when the rest of the artists finally got to Coventry. So even like from the initial moments, there were kind of things evolving and changing, and we're still in a state of flux. Like, we've got big funding applications pending, but we have no guarantee that we're going to get all of that money in. So we're having to kind of constantly contingency plan and keep moving forward, but very aware that the moment we don't get certain funding, we need to like scale back our ambitions, or we need to lose a bit of the project, or we need to think about, do we wait a year, do we change it, what do we do? So the whole thing is very much about reacting to unknowns.
I've got a couple more questions, so maybe whiz through them. From Valentina, your work made me think of Andy Goldsworthy, and I'm quite interested in sustainable art and ephemeral art, and I'd like to know what the biggest challenge was.
This project, or just generally?
Maybe generally.
I don't know about a challenge. I think, yeah, you're right to kind of make those references, and I think I'm constantly finding out more about my work each year. And I said at the beginning how I felt like really I could have done with a bit of a break between UEL and the RCA to find my creative voice. I feel like it's only really now that I'm starting to kind of get a sense of what kind of work I want to make, how I want to position it. And this, kind of environmental art and kind of the way kind of works respond to context in various ways, within that, is definitely something that's becoming much clearer to me now as being important to me. I was making these food sculptures 10 years ago. Now I feel like this is definitely like a new direction for me, but this is feeling very comfortable. Like, there's an area that I can see myself delving into for 40 years now. I guess to not be like, to realize you're on a journey and that you don't have to have it all sewn up at the early stages of your career, and that it's okay to explore and to experiment and then rule out and try something new. I think that's okay.
I remember some of the food sculptures, and I mean, it's a progression, but there was still a politics involved there, and that seems to be continuous within your practice. Some of these questions could face in this field, and what advice? I've only got half the question there, so I might leave that one for now. Bronwyn, I've always looked at sculpture as a start and an end, with the end being the goal of the art. It's very interesting to look at the performative aspect of creation and what it brings to the end result. Yeah, I mean that also came up with a talk earlier this morning about enjoying the process and allowing yourself to enjoy and engage and see where it takes you a little bit, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also for me now, it's about how does the public get to engage with that? We get to enjoy that as the artists in our studios or wherever we are. How can we share that experience, too, as well as just the kind of the finished artwork?
And I suppose that, in our society here in the UK, a lot of it's behind closed doors. Whereas when you were talking about being in India, you could be walking down the street and just watch somebody and how they do it, and then maybe go off and try it yourself if you wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very cultural, isn't it? It's also environmental. If we had nicer weather, we'd probably all be out on our front steps doing it as well, rather than like freezing in our, cold studios. Certainly.
And also that, I know people don't make corn dollies anymore, but there's always been a history, probably in most countries, where you're harvesting crops of making some sort of sculptural forms out of this sort of disposable throwaway material.
Yeah, definitely. And there's the ritual around that as well. Then they were kind of burnt, or they like brought luck for the next year's harvest. And that was the other thing with us bringing in the drumming, is that culturally within the Sikh community, a lot of the people living close to the site are actually from arable communities in the Punjab, and they were drummers arrive at sunrise and start playing in the field, and they are the soundtrack to the community harvest. You know, so it just made sense that they somehow became part of this, you know, project.
Okay, I think we've sort of slightly run over time, but we've got through most of the questions. So thank you very much, Lucy.
No, I'll stop sharing at the end so you can see me. Great. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for having me. And we'll catch up soon.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think we're finished. You can call me if you want, Lucy, after.
Okay, cool.